Hey everyone! In today's video, we're going to hear the incredible story of Malcolm Williams, a black man who had a life-changing near-death experience. He's going to share with us his shocking vision of a dystopian future he witnessed while on the brink of death, a story that makes us reflect on racism, intolerance, and what could happen if we don't act in time. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates, and don't forget to leave a like to support us in bringing more impactful content. Now, let's dive straight into Malcolm's story. My name is Malcolm Williams, and I'm a black man living in the United States, a place where history has long been shaped by people who look like me but rarely told by those of us who live it. I teach history at a local high school, and my days are usually spent guiding my students through lessons on war, civil rights, revolutions, those grand moments that, to me, feel so distant from the life I live. The irony is not lost on me that, while I teach my students about progress and justice, the world I walk through every day often denies me both. I try to stay focused on the good things, my wife, Denise, who has been my rock through everything, and my love for teaching. There's something empowering about standing in front of a classroom, offering knowledge, showing young minds that the world isn't as simple as it seems. But no matter how much I pour into my work, there's a weight I can't shake. It's there when I walk into stores and feel eyes on me, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Is he dangerous? What's he doing here? It's there when I see the news, the endless reports of black men shot for reasons no one can explain. And it's there when I drive through my neighborhood, knowing that a simple trip home could take a turn for the worse, and I might not even make it to the front door. That day started like any other. I finished my classes and was looking forward to dinner with Denise. The sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the streets as I drove home. The calm of the evening was comforting, the hum of the radio in the background. Then, out of nowhere, red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror, and my heart sank. I've been pulled over before, more times than I can count, but something about this moment felt different. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. I pulled over, feeling the tension coil in my chest. The moment that followed would alter my life in ways I could never have imagined. I pulled my car over to the side of the road, feeling the familiar cold dread wash over me. My heart pounded in my chest as I placed both hands on the steering wheel, fingers tense against the leather, exactly how I'd been taught to do in these situations. Years of experience told me that no sudden movements were allowed, no gestures that could be misinterpreted. The flashing lights reflected in my rearview mirror, casting eerie red and blue shadows across my face. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself, but deep down, I knew this wouldn't be just another routine stop. The officer approached slowly. He was tall, white, and broad-shouldered, wearing the same detached, stern expression I had come to recognize. His hand hovered near his gun as if expecting trouble. I glanced at his badge as he reached my window. Henderson? I'd never met him, but that didn't matter. His uniform carried with it all the weight of a system that had never been designed with someone like me in mind. License and registration, he said coldly, without any greeting. I handed over my documents, keeping my movements deliberate and slow. Officer, is there a problem? I asked, my voice calm, though my nerves were on edge. You were driving erratically, Henderson said, his eyes narrowing as if daring me to argue. Mind stepping out of the vehicle? I knew the drill. Questioning an officer, especially someone like Henderson, would only escalate things. But I also knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I was driving just fine, sir, I replied cautiously, hoping reason might prevail. Is there any specific reason you're asking me to step out? His lips tightened. I said, step out of the vehicle. There it was, that shift in tone, the authority dripping from his words, reminding me of the imbalance of power. This wasn't a request, it was a command. I hesitated, my mind racing with all the possible outcomes of this moment. Denise's voice echoed in the back of my mind, warning me to always cooperate, to stay alive. So, with a sigh, I unlocked my seatbelt and stepped out of the car, my feet meeting the cold pavement. The street was quiet, the night wrapping around us like a shroud, only the distant hum of traffic in the background. Henderson circled me like a predator sizing up its prey. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, though the words felt hollow, rehearsed, as if they had been used 1,000 times before. Hands on the hood. A pit formed in my stomach. I had heard those words too many times in news reports, stories about black men who never made it home after a routine stop. My heart raced as I complied. My palms pressed against the cold metal of the hood. This felt wrong. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't just an ordinary stop. Something darker lurked beneath Henderson's gaze, something fueled by more than just suspicion. "Are you carrying any weapons?" he barked. Before I could answer, he shoved me against the car, roughly patting me down. "I didn't do anything," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Henderson paused, his breath heavy on the back of my neck. "You resisting?" The tension in the air was suffocating. I clenched my fists, trying to control the anger and fear bubbling inside. "No, sir, I'm not resisting." But in that moment, it didn't matter what I said. The world slowed down as Henderson grabbed his gun. All I could do was stare in disbelief as time seemed to stretch infinitely. The sound of the gunshot shattered the silence, and everything went black. The world seemed to collapse into a single moment, a fleeting second stretched into eternity. I heard the gunfire before I even felt the pain. There was a deafening bang, and everything froze. Time slowed down as the impact hit me, first as a distant thud, then as a sharp, burning pain that spread like wildfire through my chest. My knees buckled under me, and I collapsed onto the cold pavement. It was strange, almost surreal, how the night air felt heavier, the streetlights above me blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. I couldn't catch my breath. The pain was overwhelming, but more than that was the shock, the disbelief that this was actually happening. "Why?" I tried to ask, but no sound came out. My mouth moved, forming the question, but the words were stuck somewhere between my mind and the reality closing in on me. I looked up at Officer Henderson, whose expression was as unreadable as ever. He stood over me, his hand still gripping the gun, his face tight with something I couldn't place. Fear? Regret? Or was it just the cold indifference I had seen in his eyes moments before? Blood soaked through my shirt, warm at first, but quickly cooling in the night air. My vision blurred as I lay there on the ground, and for a moment, everything seemed distant, like I was watching from the outside. The sounds around me, the distant cars, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, faded into the background. My heartbeat, once strong and steady, became erratic, struggling against the inevitable. I gasped for air, each breath harder than the last, my body betraying me as life slipped away. In those moments, I thought of Denise, her smile, her laugh, the way she always made me feel like everything would be okay, even when the world outside was anything but. I thought of her waiting for me at home, expecting me to walk through the door as I always did. And then I thought of all the black men who had been here before me. Countless lives lost for no reason, countless futures stolen in an instant. I was just another name, another face, another headline. As my eyes fluttered shut, I realized that I was teetering on the edge of something far greater than the pain in my chest. The world around me faded, and a strange calm began to settle in. It was as if the weight of the moment, the violence and fear, had been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer felt the cold pavement beneath me or the searing pain of the gunshot. Instead, I felt nothing. It was a void, but not an empty one. It was peaceful. The sirens in the distance, the shouts of people gathering around, they all became muffled, distant echoes in a world that was slipping away from me. I was no longer part of that reality, no longer tethered to the ground. Something was pulling me out of my body, lifting me toward an unfamiliar light that beckoned with a strange, irresistible force. I was leaving, I realized, leaving the world behind. And then, just like that, everything went dark. I was gone. When the darkness enveloped me, I felt an odd detachment from everything I had ever known. The pain, the fear, even the sound of my own labored breaths, they were gone. I was no longer Malcolm Williams, the man bleeding out on a cold street. I wasn't anything. Yet, somehow, I was aware. It was a strange sensation, like floating but not quite. I was surrounded by an endless, infinite blackness that was neither cold nor warm. For a moment, I wondered if this was death, the final stop where everything just ends. But it didn't feel final. It felt like a pause, as if I was waiting for something, waiting to be shown where to go next. Suddenly, from the nothingness, I became aware of a pull, a force drawing me towards something. It wasn't violent or frightening. It was gentle, almost comforting. The darkness around me began to shift, and in the distance, a light appeared. It was small at first, like a flicker of a candle, but as I moved, or maybe it was the light moving toward me, it grew brighter, expanding until it was all I could see. It wasn't just a light, though. It was more than that. It felt alive, as if it had a presence, a consciousness that was aware of me. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever: peace. But the peace didn't come alone. Along with it came a flood of emotions, memories, moments from my life. It was as if my entire existence was being laid bare before me, every detail magnified in ways I had never considered. I saw myself as a child, running through the streets of my neighborhood, free and unburdened by the weight of the world. I saw my mother's face, her tired eyes filled with love and concern as she watched over me. And then I saw Denise, the day we first met, her laughter echoing in my ears, her touch so vivid that for a second, I believed I could reach out and feel her skin beneath my fingers. These memories weren't just images, they were emotions. I felt the love, the joy, but also the pain, the fear, the disappointments I had tried so hard to bury. Each one came rushing back to me, reminding me of the person I had been, the man I had tried to become, and the mistakes I had made along the way. There were moments I was proud of, and others I wished I could take back. But what struck me most was how clearly I saw them now, without the cloud of anger or judgment that had once blurred my vision. Everything just was. In the middle of this cascade of memories, I felt a presence beside me. It wasn't something I could see, but I knew it was there, watching, waiting. I felt no fear, only a deep sense of curiosity. Who, or what was this? A guide? An angel? God? The questions flooded my mind, but the presence remained silent, simply observing as if waiting for me to come to terms with what was happening. I didn't know how long I floated there, between life and whatever this place was. Time had no meaning. It was as though I was suspended in a state where everything and nothing mattered all at once. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light began to fade. The peace that had surrounded me started to slip away, replaced by an urgent, pulling sensation, like I was being yanked backward. I wanted to stay, to understand more, but something was pulling me back, dragging me toward the darkness once again. There was a brief moment of panic. I didn't want to go back to that world of pain, of violence, where I lay dying on a cold street. But I had no choice. Something stronger than me was calling me home. And just like that, I was back. Back in my body, back in the world. The searing pain hit me first, followed by the sound of voices, urgent, frantic. My chest burned as I gasped for breath, the weight of reality crashing down around me. I wasn't dead. Not yet. But as I opened my eyes and saw the paramedics working to save my life, I realized something else. I had been given a glimpse of something beyond this world, and I would never be the same again. As I faded in and out of consciousness, the pain in my body began to dull, replaced by an overwhelming sense of weightlessness. It was as if I had been ripped from my own reality, suspended somewhere between life and death once again. But this time, when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the darkness I had known before. I was somewhere else, somewhere impossibly bright. The light was so intense that at first, I thought I had gone blind. Everything around me was white, whiter than anything I'd ever seen. The ground, the sky, the walls of whatever space I was in all blended together, erasing the sense of distance or depth. It was disorienting, like being lost in a fog. except this fog was sharp, clean, and impossibly sterile. There was no warmth here, no shadows to give it form, just an endless, blinding white that swallowed me whole. I stood, or maybe I floated. It was hard to tell. My body felt different, lighter, yet somehow still connected to the strange place I found myself in. As I looked around, I noticed figures moving in the distance, slowly at first, but then they became clearer. They were people, or at least they looked like people. Their skin was pale, almost translucent in the stark whiteness. They were all white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, their features unervingly uniform, and all of them were staring at me. There was something off about the way they looked at me. At first, I thought it was curiosity, but as they drew closer, I realized it was something deeper. Their eyes, so wide, so intent, were filled with awe, as if I were some sort of mythical creature, something they had heard of but never seen before. Some of them smiled, their faces lighting up in reverence. Others whispered to each other, though their voices were muffled and distant, as if coming from another plane of existence. It wasn't long before one of them stepped forward, a woman tall, with hair so blonde it nearly glowed. She approached me with a strange mix of caution and admiration. Her eyes, though cold, sparkled with a kind of feverish excitement. "You're real," she said softly, her voice almost trembling with emotion. I took a step back, unsure of what to say or do. Real? Of course, I was real. But the way she said it, it was as if she had been waiting for someone like me her entire life. "What is this place?" I finally asked, my voice sounding foreign in this strange world. Her smile widened, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're in the perfect world," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "We've been waiting for you." Before I could respond, more figures closed in around me. Men, women, all of them with the same hollow looks, the same hungry eyes. They moved toward me, their hands reaching out, not to harm, but to touch, as if I were something precious, something they couldn't afford to let slip away. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Everywhere I turned, I was surrounded by pale hands and ghostly faces, all fixated on me. "We need you," another voice said from the crowd, a man this time. "You're what's been missing." Missing? I didn't understand what they were talking about. "What are you talking about?" "I don't belong here," I said, trying to push through the crowd, my heart racing with unease. But they didn't let me go. Instead, they pressed closer, their voices rising in desperate whispers. "You're all we have left." I froze at those words. Something about the way they said it, the sadness in their eyes, chilled me to my core. It wasn't until then that I started to piece together what this place was. This wasn't a paradise. This wasn't some heavenly realm of light. No, this was something far darker. I looked around, really seeing the people for the first time. Their gaunt faces, their hollow smiles, the emptiness that clung to them like a shadow. And then it hit me. They weren't looking at me as a person. They were looking at me as a relic, a symbol of something they had destroyed. "Where are the others?" I asked, my voice trembling as I finally began to understand. The woman looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "There are no others," she said softly. "We destroyed them all." My blood ran cold. I wasn't in some heaven. I was in a world where black people no longer existed. A world that had erased my people from existence, and now they realized too late what they had done. I had entered their hell. The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "We destroyed them all." The sentence echoed in my mind, reverberating in the silence that followed, twisting my stomach in knots. The pale, emotionless faces around me, those hollow eyes, the lifeless smiles, suddenly made sense. I had fallen into a world that was barren of black life, a world where my people had been eradicated, leaving behind only a void, a haunting absence that these pale figures could no longer ignore. "What do you mean?" I stammered, my voice cracking under the pressure of the horrific revelation. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. "What happened to the others? How could you destroy them all?" The woman didn't flinch. She simply gazed at me with that same eerie reverence, as if she expected me to understand, to accept what she was saying. "It wasn't us, not directly, she said, her voice soft and almost apologetic. But generations ago, our ancestors, they made choices. Choices that wiped out an entire people. Her eyes glazed over with a faraway sadness, as if she could see the horrors of the past unfolding right in front of her. I looked around again, really taking in the environment, the people, the stark, oppressive whiteness of it all. There were no colors, no vibrancy, no life. This world wasn't just devoid of black people. It was devoid of culture, of richness, of everything that had made life beautiful and complex. The people here were sterile, trapped in their own creation, surrounded by the fruits of their ancestors' sins. And now, they were left with nothing but their regret. We didn't understand what we were losing. A man spoke up, stepping out of the crowd. His pale face was lined with wrinkles, but his blue eyes burned with sorrow. We thought the world would be better this way, more pure. But we were wrong. We were so wrong. I shook my head, disbelief and horror twisting together inside me. You're telling me you erased black people from existence? You tried to purify the world and now you... What? You regret it? My voice rose with each word, anger bubbling to the surface. Now you want to tell me that I'm what's been missing? You destroyed everything, and now you're sorry. They all stared at me, their faces filled with a strange mixture of shame and hope. Hope that I could somehow fix what had been broken beyond repair. It was disgusting. I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat, fury choking me as I tried to comprehend the scope of their crime. These people had annihilated entire cultures, entire histories, and now they were left clinging to the ghost of what they had destroyed. And they looked at me as if I were their salvation. We didn't realize, the woman continued, her voice breaking. We didn't know that without them, without you, the world would lose its balance. We thought we were creating perfection, but instead, we created a prison. Our lives have no meaning anymore. There's no beauty, no joy. We live in guilt, knowing that we can never bring back what we've lost. I backed away from them, feeling sick to my core. These weren't people. They were shells, empty and consumed by the weight of their own choices. And the worst part? They didn't want me here out of love or respect. They wanted me because they were desperate, because they needed something to fill the emptiness they had created. They had come to worship the very thing they had once despised and destroyed. But their worship wasn't about redemption. It was about their own survival. I'm not here to save you, I said through gritted teeth, my anger burning hotter with each passing second. You don't get to erase us and then beg for us to come back. You don't get to make us a myth, something to idolize when it's convenient for you. You can't undo what's been done. The crowd of pale faces fell silent, their eyes wide and pleading. But I was done with them, done with their regret, done with their world. I turned away from them, trying to find a way out of this nightmarish place. But everywhere I turned, the endless white stretched on, suffocating me with its stark emptiness. There was no escape. I was trapped in their guilt, in the hell they had built for themselves. As I stood there, the reality of it all sinking in, I felt a cold shiver run through me. This wasn't just a punishment for them. It was a warning for me, for all of us still alive in the world I had left behind. This was what unchecked hatred, racism, and division could lead to. A world where everything that makes us human is wiped out, leaving nothing but regret in its place. Suddenly, I felt that familiar pull again, that tug on my soul dragging me back to where I had come from. The whiteness began to blur around me, the faces fading into the distance. And then, in an instant, I was gone from that world. But the horror of what I had seen stayed with me. It would stay with me forever. As I was pulled from that hellish world, the pale faces and their hollow pleas still echoed in my mind. Even though I was leaving them behind, the weight of their regret followed me, clinging to me like a shadow. The overwhelming guilt they carried, for what they had done and for what they had lost, was palpable. It wasn't just a regret of individuals. It was a collective grief, a gnawing realization that their world had unraveled due to the irreversible mistakes of their ancestors. And the worst part? They had only come to understand it when it was far too late. As I drifted, caught between the spiritual and physical realms, the full scope of their regret began to settle in my mind. These people, in their blind pursuit of what they thought was purity, had not just destroyed a race. They had destroyed a vital part of the fabric that holds humanity together. They had torn out the vibrant threads of diversity and richness, leaving behind a cold, sterile existence where everyone looked the same, thought the same, and lived the same. They had believed, at some point in their history, that they were creating a utopia, that by erasing what they feared or misunderstood, they would achieve peace, perfection. But the opposite had happened. In their quest for control, they had erased joy, culture, and meaning from their lives. They had stripped the world of the colors, music, stories, and emotions that make it alive. Their pale, empty existence was not a paradise. It was a prison, a constant reminder of everything they could never recover. I thought of the woman's words. We didn't realize what we were losing. The sorrow in her voice had been genuine, but it did nothing to soften the reality of what they had done. They didn't realize, and by the time they did, the damage was irreversible. They could no longer bring back the people they had eradicated, and their world was a hollow shell of what it once had been. The absence of Black people, the erasure of their cultures, their histories, their contributions, had hollowed out their society. Without the richness of diversity, without the balance that difference brings, they were left with nothing but their mistakes. But regret wasn't enough. It never is. Regret couldn't undo the violence, the hatred, the systematic erasure of entire communities. It couldn't bring back the beauty and life they had destroyed in their arrogance and fear. These people were trapped in a hell of their own making, forever haunted by the knowledge that they had severed the very roots of their humanity. And now, they lived in perpetual grief for what they could never have again. Their desperate reverence for me, their desire to worship what they had once destroyed, wasn't driven by love or understanding. It was desperation, pure and simple. They wanted to possess me, to claim me as some symbol of the redemption they couldn't earn. But their reverence was hollow, just like everything else in their world. They wanted me to fill the void they had created, to be the missing piece that might ease their suffering. But I couldn't be that for them. I wouldn't be. I felt an anger rising in me again. Anger at their blindness, at their arrogance. How could they not see what they were doing? How could they believe that erasing a people, a culture, was the answer to their fears? And now, how could they expect me, or anyone like me, to save them from the consequences of their actions? They were the architects of their own despair, and I was not their salvation. As I drifted further away from their world, I felt a cold sense of clarity. This wasn't just a vision of some far-off dystopia. This was a warning, a reflection of what could happen if we, in the world I had left behind, didn't confront the hatred, racism, and division that still festered in our society. Their regret, their grief, was a glimpse of a possible future. A future where intolerance and fear had gone unchecked, where we had allowed the forces of destruction to take root, and where it was too late to fix what had been lost. But for me, it wasn't too late. Not yet. I was being given a chance, an opportunity to go back and do something, to fight for the world I came from, to make sure it never became the lifeless, colorless place I had just escaped from. And I knew, deep down, that this was my mission now. This vision, this experience, wasn't just for me. It was for everyone. I had to share what I had seen, to warn others, to make sure we never fell into the same trap of hatred and fear that had destroyed those people. As the pull toward my body became stronger, I felt a sense of urgency building in me. I had to return. I had to survive. There was too much at stake now, too much to fight for. And then, with a jolt, I felt myself slipping back into my body, back into the world I knew, but with a new understanding that would change everything. The moment I snapped back into my body, the physical pain hit me like a sledgehammer. The bright, sterile world I had just left was replaced by the harsh, chaotic reality of flashing lights, distant sirens, and frantic voices. My chest burned where the bullet had entered, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I lay on the cold pavement. Paramedics surrounded me, their hands moving quickly to stabilize my body, shouting instructions to one another that my foggy mind could barely process. But even as the agony surged through my body, a deeper, more unsettling pain settled into my soul. I had seen something more terrifying than death. That white, blinding world I had left behind was not just a warning of a possible future. It was a glimpse into the consequences of unchecked hatred, a place where regret was endless, but redemption was impossible. It was a hell of their own making, and no matter how many times I tried to shake the thought, it lingered like a dark cloud over everything I had once believed. Hell wasn't fire and brimstone, not the way I had imagined it from sermons and stories. No, it was much worse. It was a cold, colorless void. It was a place where people, driven by their worst instincts, had obliterated the very things that made life worth living. And the punishment for their actions wasn't physical suffering. It was something far more profound. It was the unrelenting awareness of what they had done, the knowledge that they could never take it back. I shuddered, trying to push the images out of my head as the paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher. My body screamed in protest, but my mind was somewhere else, still locked in that other world. Even as I blinked up at the night sky, trying to focus on the here and now, the faces from that place haunted me. Their empty stares, their desperate pleas. They weren't looking for forgiveness. They were looking for a way out of the prison they had built for themselves. But there was no way out, and that was the true horror of it. As they wheeled me into the ambulance, my mind kept racing. I had to make sense of what I had seen. I had to understand why I had been shown that place. Why me? Why now? A paramedic leaned over me, his face tense as he checked my vitals. "Stay with us, buddy. We've got you," he said, his voice firm but kind. But I barely heard him. My mind was racing, trying to process everything. Why had I survived? What was I supposed to do with the knowledge I had now? The flashing red and blue lights blurred in my peripheral vision, and I could hear the distant murmur of my surroundings, but none of it felt real. The only thing that felt real was the profound sense of responsibility that weighed on me. I had been to that place, and now I had come back. But I hadn't come back the same. Lying there, my body broken but my mind sharp, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could let this experience fade, let it become just another nightmare, or I could take what I had seen and use it. I had seen the future, a future built on fear, division, and hatred. I had witnessed what happens when we let those things fester and grow, and now I had the chance to do something about it. But the fear gnawed at me too. The enormity of it all was suffocating. What if no one believed me? What if I couldn't make them see what I had seen? The people in that white world had realized their mistakes too late. Could I stop that from happening here? Or was I destined to watch it unfold again, helpless to prevent the destruction? I closed my eyes, feeling the cold of the night seep into my bones. Denise's face flashed in my mind again. Her smile, her warmth. I had to survive for her, for myself, for the future that was still possible, if only people would listen. The weight of the experience pressed down on me, but underneath it was a flicker of something else, determination. I had been given a second chance, a glimpse into what could happen if we didn't change, and I couldn't waste it. I had to tell my story, no matter how hard it would be. I had to make people understand that hatred and division weren't just concepts. They were poison, slowly killing everything good in the world. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, the sounds of the world around me began to sharpen. The beeping of the heart monitor, the rustling of medical supplies, the murmured voices of the paramedics, they all started to come back into focus. My body was still fighting, still clinging to life. And so was I, because now I had a purpose. What I had seen was real, and it was a warning, and I wasn't going to let it be in vain. With each painful breath, I told myself that I would fight. For Denise, for the people who had been erased in that other world, and for the world I still had a chance to save. The sterile lights of the hospital ceiling blinked into view as I came to, my body aching with every breath. The pain reminded me that I was still alive, though barely. The faces of nurses and doctors hovered above me, their voices muffled as if I were underwater. I could hear machines beeping, feel the tightness of bandages across my chest. I was tethered to this world, barely hanging on, but I was here. The sensation of returning to life was jarring, as if I had been ripped from that other place and thrust back into my body. It felt foreign at first, my limbs heavy, my breath shallow, the weight of my body something I had to readjust to. My mind was still clouded with the images from the white world, with the regret and sorrow of the people who had destroyed everything beautiful in their lives. I felt a strange distance from the physical world around me, like I was caught between two realities. But the reality of my survival slowly started to settle in. A voice pierced through the fog. "Malcolm, can you hear me?" It was Denise. Her voice was thick with emotion, trembling just above a whisper. But to me, it was the most grounding sound in the world. My wife, my anchor to life. I blinked, trying to focus, my eyes burning from the effort. And then, there she was, sitting beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly as if she were holding on for both of us. The relief on her face was overwhelming, her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was the first thing I truly saw. I had made it back. "Denise," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. I could feel the rawness in my throat, the toll that everything had taken on my body. But her presence gave me strength. It was as if her touch, her voice, was pulling me fully back into the world I had almost left behind. "You're okay," she whispered, her tears falling freely now. "You're alive." The room around me slowly came into focus. Sterile, white walls, the constant beeping of machines, the steady hum of the hospital ward. A doctor stood nearby, watching my vitals closely, and I saw a few other nurses bustling about. But none of that mattered. It was Denise, sitting beside me, her hand still clutching mine, that mattered. She was real, and I was alive. As I tried to absorb everything, the weight of my experience in the other world came crashing down on me. I had seen something no one should ever see. I had been to the other side, and I had returned with a vision of the future, one that I couldn't ignore. I squeezed Denise's hand, desperate to anchor myself in the present moment, but the flood of emotions, the memories of what I had witnessed, wouldn't let me rest. I saw something, I whispered, my voice shaking. "Denise, I saw the future. A place where we don't exist, where everything is gone." Her face clouded with concern, her fingers gently brushing my cheek. "Malcolm, don't talk about that now. You need to rest." But I couldn't stop. I had to get the words out before they slipped away, before the magnitude of what I had experienced was lost. They destroyed us, Denise, everyone. And now, they regret it. But it's too late. It was like a nightmare, but it felt so real. She blinked back, tears, confusion and fear flashing across her face. "You've been through so much. Please, just rest. We can talk about it later." But I shook my head weakly, trying to sit up despite the pain. "No, Denise, you have to understand. I was there. I was in a world where everything we are, everything we represent, was wiped out. And they knew it. They were trapped in a hell of their own making, and I can't let that happen here." Her grip on my hand tightened, her expression torn between wanting to comfort me and fearing what I was saying. "Malcolm, you're here now. You're safe. We'll figure this out together, okay?" I closed my eyes for a moment, the exhaustion overwhelming me, but the urgency still burning deep inside. I knew she didn't fully understand yet. How could she? It sounded impossible. But I also knew I couldn't keep this to myself. The vision of that white, empty world, of the pale faces filled with regret, was seared into my mind. It wasn't just a vision of death. It was a warning, a glimpse of what could happen if we allowed hatred, racism, and division to consume us. When I opened my eyes again, Denise was still there, watching me with those kind, worried eyes. She was the reason I had fought to come back. But now, I had more to fight for. "I have to tell people," I said softly. "I have to warn them. We can't let this happen." She didn't respond right away, but her expression softened as she gently stroked my hair. "We'll do it together," she said finally, her voice steady. "But for now, just rest. You've been given a second chance, Malcolm. Let's take it one step at a time." Her words were soothing, and for the first time since I'd woken up, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. She was right. I had a second chance. I had returned from a place most people never come back from, and with that came a responsibility. I couldn't let what I had seen fade into a bad dream. It was my duty to share what I had learned, to help people understand that the choices we make now will shape the future for generations to come. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought remained clear. I had survived for a reason, and now I had a mission. Days passed, but the memories of what I had seen during my near-death experience stayed with me as vividly as when I first returned to life. The sterile walls of the hospital couldn't wash away the images of that white world, nor could the soft reassurances of Denise Chase away the weight of the responsibility I now carried. My body was healing, but my mind was still trapped in the echoes of that hellish place, haunted by the vision of what could be. I had seen the future, or at least a version of it, and now I knew that I couldn't stay silent. The first few days were a blur of doctors, nurses, and visitors. Friends, colleagues, and even a few students came to check on me. They brought flowers, cards, and awkward smiles, clearly unsure of how to approach someone who had nearly died at the hands of a police officer. They asked how I was feeling, what I remembered of the incident, but no one, except Denise, knew what I had really experienced. No one understood the darkness I had seen or the profound urgency that now filled my heart. It wasn't until the fourth day that I was finally well enough to sit up in bed and speak with more than a few whispered words. Denise had been by my side every step of the way, watching over me with a protective, almost fierce determination. But I could see the toll it was taking on her too. Her eyes were shadowed with sleeplessness, her voice thick with worry. Still, she remained my constant source of strength. As the morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft shadows on the walls, I turned to her. "Denise," I began, my voice still rough, but steadier than it had been in days. "I need to talk to people. I need to tell them what I saw." She sighed softly, her hand finding mine. "Malcolm, I know this is important to you, but you just came back from the brink of death. You need time to recover." "I don't have time," I said, shaking my head. "I can't wait, Denise. What I saw, it's bigger than just me. It's bigger than us. People need to know. They need to understand what's at stake." She stared at me for a moment, her lips pressed together, the weight of my words sinking in. "I believe you," she whispered finally, her voice trembling with emotion. "But how are you going to make them believe you?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know how. How do you convince people of a vision, of something so abstract, so terrifying, when they haven't seen it with their own eyes? Especially now, in a world already so divided, where hatred and violence were just a part of the daily news cycle. How do you get people to listen? "I'll start by telling my story," I said, the words forming with more certainty as I spoke them aloud. "People know what happened to me, about the shooting. They'll want to hear from me, to know what I went through. I'll use that to tell them what I saw. I'll tell them about the world I was taken to, and what it could mean for all of us." Denise's eyes softened, and she leaned closer, brushing her hand gently against my cheek. "I'll be with you every step of the way," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out together." The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of recovery and preparation. My physical strength began to return little by little, and with it, the resolve to carry out my mission grew stronger. I started by speaking to those closest to me, friends and family, people I trusted. I told them about the vision, about the world where Black people had been erased, and the endless regret that consumed those who had caused it. Some listened with quiet disbelief, others with open curiosity. A few dismissed it entirely, saying I must have been hallucinating, that it was just the trauma of being shot. But I didn't waver. Denise and I spent long nights discussing how to get the message out. We thought about the best way to share what I had seen without sounding like a madman. She helped me write down everything I remembered, every detail of that white, soulless world, and the people who had lost everything. Together, we formed a plan. Soon after, I gave my first interview to a local journalist who had been covering my story since the shooting. She sat across from me, her notepad poised, ready to ask about the incident with the police officer. But instead of focusing on the event itself, I steered the conversation toward my near-death experience. At first, she looked skeptical, her pen hesitating above the paper. But as I described the world I had seen, her curiosity shifted to something deeper, an understanding that I wasn't just sharing a story of survival, but a warning. The future I saw, I told her, is what happens when we allow hatred, fear, and racism to dominate our society. It's not just about the past. It's about what could happen if we don't change. The article that followed was both startling and thought-provoking. It framed my experience as a cautionary tale, blending the reality of the violence I had faced with the spiritual journey I had undergone. Soon, other media outlets picked up the story, and I was invited to speak at community events, town halls, and even on a few television programs. Each time, I shared the same message. The world I had seen was a reflection of what happens when we stop valuing human life, when we erase people from existence because of fear and hate. Some people were moved by what I said. Others were skeptical. But I knew that the more I spoke, the more I could plant the seeds of awareness. I wasn't trying to convince everyone all at once. I just wanted people to think, to question their assumptions, their biases, to understand that the path we were on could lead us to a future none of us wanted. As the months passed, the impact of my story grew. People began to reach out to me, not just to ask about my experience, but to share their own fears about the direction the world was heading in. I heard from activists, community leaders, and ordinary people who felt the same urgency I did. That if we didn't change, if we didn't confront the darkness within ourselves, we could end up in a world of regret, just like the one I had seen. And so, my mission continued. I wasn't a preacher or a prophet. I was just a man who had seen a glimpse of what could be, and I had been given a second chance to warn others. Each time I spoke, I felt the weight of that responsibility, but I also felt hope, because I knew that as long as people were willing to listen, there was still time to change the course we were on. This was my purpose now, to speak out, to fight against the forces of hate, and to remind people of the beauty and value of every life, before it was too late. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a like so you don't miss any future content. See you in the next video.